Conversations. Since childhood, I've been a good listener. I thought that would qualify me to be a good psychologist, so I studied psychology in college. Thankfully, the Lord put me on a different path, for He knew that such a career of listening to others' painful problems would be quite painful and problematic to an empath. Though I never became a professional listener, over-listening has carried over into everyday life. Not that I habitually eavesdrop, I try not to over-listen that way. I just often find myself lending a listening ear to whomever needs one. The problem is, when angry people need to talk, unfortunately it's not always rosy. Though good at listening, I'm not so good at keeping conversations holy. Though others, as well as I, appreciate someone willing to listen, are we always willing to listen to the Holy Spirit when He gently convicts us that what we're saying shouldn't actually be said? And what about when something shouldn't be heard? When we're on the listening side and there comes a major conviction to change the direction of the conversation, do we listen to the Holy Spirit who's trying to keep us from sinning? Or do we simply and sinfully keep listening to the human who's talking? Admittedly, I sometimes listen to the talking human when curiosity overtakes me. And when adult peer pressure comes into play, fearing what the speaker will say if I say no more. I get saddened when I realize that I've made God sad because I was afraid to make a human being mad. But then, as the conversation lingers, I get increasingly convicted that my ears shouldn't be involved in the verbal crime. So, right then and there, I determine that it will never happen again. Then it does. The conversation conviction then becomes a conversation conversion. I become all the more determined not to let the enemy destroy my peace and that of the talkers. So I strive to be brave and stop all tattlers. But how does one gracefully stop a gossiper, a talebearer, and a slanderer? It's an uncomfortable situation to find ourselves in, right? I assume you've been in similar dialogue dilemmas. We don't want to offend the person who's talking, but later we feel guilty for merely listening. Famous author E.G. White refers to such gossiping as evil speaking, and adds that those who contribute to the conversation by merely listening are just as guilty as the gossiper. Wow, that's convicting. If we also contribute verbally, adding our own sour opinions to the mix, we later feel even worse about the interaction. Let's not let Satan use our gift of speech for his purposes. Let's only speak what is uplifting to the hearers and to ourselves. We're told to think before we speak, right? So a good acronym to remember is THINK. Before we even open our mouths, we each can think and ask ourselves, is what we are about to say true, helpful, inspiring, necessary, and kind? If not, let's refrain. Here's a poem written years ago when given conversation conviction.
Do we speak to gripe and spread gossip, or rather to spread the gospel? Is what comes out of our mouths holy, or is it hostile? In summer we tend to complain of the heat, come winter complain of the cold. We whine sometimes about being too young, and then about being too old. We waste our words about hair that's too curly, or maybe that it's too straight. We tend to love what others are given, while what we're given we hate. On dry days do we complain of no rain? On wet ones fret that it's raining? Heaven must certainly wish that we would stop all our complaining. Do we share the juicy latest, or listen to others who do? Is what we're saying and hearing unkind, uncouth, untrue? Do we grumble or grow in the midst of woe? Are we hateful or grateful? Are first reactions wrath and complaint, or restraint and being thankful? Did we ever call someone a name, or tell someone else that he's worthless? Much that is said is terribly hurtful, or just plain no one's business. Ephesians 4, verse 29, let no corrupt word proceed out of your mouth. Is each word pointing heavenward or pointing to the south? Why is it true that really bad news travels incredibly fast? If we could spread the good news as quickly, we'd be in heaven at last. When we're tempted to gossip or complain, let's refrain.
Thankfully, by listening to the still small voice of God's Holy Spirit, we all can experience not just a conversation conviction, but a major conversation conversion.